Looks like
He drew the
somebody sent him
ABA
to
faces on him. He drew the ABA faces on him. I love it. He murdered the ABA faces. Out of all of the projects that I have been requested to review, this one is actually legitimately one of my favorites, and I have most been looking forward to reacting to this one.
We came here because we heard you specialized in, what is it? What does he have?
I'm not a fan of labels, ma'am.
I am a fan of labels. Labels are very important. Labels are what allows us to have accommodations. I think so many autistic, non-autistic people say things like, I'm not a fan of labels because they are uncomfortable with the stigma that society has placed around labels, but they are unaware that these labels actually legitimately help save our lives, basically, because without these labels we don't get the accommodations that we need. Without an autism diagnosis, there's nothing stopping people from just denying us what we need and just saying you don't really need it. And also, because it is mandatory for every stream, Diet Coke, sponsor me, now in HD. I am so addicted, I would literally die if I did not have it.
Fabric sensitivity. Hugging.
Okay, I want to talk real fast about Justine here. Justine lacks the capability to communicate verbally. She cannot speak the same way that I am speaking to you now. But that does not mean that Justine cannot communicate. What Justine just did by kicking off that shoe is she communicated that that shoe is making her uncomfortable. The sensory aspect of the shoe is too overstimulating for her. That is why I tell people that non-speaking does not necessarily mean non-communicative, because there is non-verbal communication going on here. It's just that neurotypicals have a harder time learning what that non-verbal communication looks like. Like, some parents might see that and just think, oh, she's being stubborn. I, as an autistic person, see that and I think, oh, that's overstimulation. It's okay that you guys don't know, but don't say that we don't communicate, because we very much do. Many of us very much do. There are a select few who cannot even functionally communicate that way, but just don't assume that we're all completely incapable. Don't assume that people are incapable, because it's hurtful, it's harmful, and it's stigmatizing.
Loud noises and bright lights bother him. He needs more of it, not less.
I have issues with these kinds of parents all the time. I wholeheartedly disagree. The thing that many autistic people misunderstand about autism and the aspects of sensory overload, it's not just that it's uncomfortable for us. In many aspects, it's downright painful. There was an actual study done on autistic people versus autistic people, where they had both parties listen to a frequency that was like a really uncomfortable frequency for either autistic or non-autistic people. And they just kept playing the frequency for a select period of time to see how they would react as time went on with this frequency still playing. And the neurotypical people, as time went on with this frequency still playing through the headphones, it got less bothersome for them as they got used to it, because they got used to it. When it came to the autistic people in the study, as this high frequency sound kept playing, it actually got more bothersome and more uncomfortable, because we don't have the ability to adapt like that. When you stick your autistic child in a sensory unfriendly place, they're not just going to adapt and forget that it's uncomfortable. They're just going to learn how to pretend like it's not to make you comfortable. And there's a big difference. That's what we call masking. And it's really hard. So what we're seeing from Justine here is she is beginning to have a meltdown due to empathy from young Christian here. She is having a meltdown because he is having a meltdown. Her meltdown is now more triggered by him being overstimulated than it is her being overstimulated. A lot of the times people think that we don't feel empathy. And while some autistic people don't feel empathy, and that is okay, many of us do feel either empathy or hyper empathy. For autistic people who do feel empathy, it is a lot easier to feel empathy when we know what the other person is going through. And Justine absolutely knows what Christian's going through because she has experienced overstimulation. So yeah, I just wanted to point out that, yeah, autistic people do feel empathy, and sometimes we can have meltdowns out of empathy. One last thing I want to point out, I have Googled, and there is not a single autistic actor in this film. That's a problem. There's not a single autistic child actor. There's not a single autistic adult actor. There is not a single autistic actor in this film. And that is because of discrimination. They saw that they were doing an action movie, and they immediately thought that we can't do it. And that's not true. There are plenty of autistic actors who could have performed these roles. And this is not to say that any of these actors are doing a bad job. I actually think that these actors are giving great performances. But unfortunately, these fantastic performances are also ableist. Doesn't mean anybody is a bad person for it. It's just a form of discrimination that has happened in this film. There are plenty of autistic actors, autistic child actors, who could have done this. I know that my agency that I am signed by, they exclusively work with disabled people. They have so many autistic child actors in their roster that could have done this. And as far as the leads go, there was an actor just recently who came out as autistic, Wentworth Miller. Wentworth Miller just came out as autistic. He easily could have played the part of Christian. Now, granted, Wentworth Miller did not know he was autistic at the time of this particular film being filmed. So, like, people would have probably said it was ableist if he had gotten cast until later on he comes out as autistic. But there are autistic actors in this business. There are so many of us, and so many of us can do everything in this film. Any of us could have done this.
Do you like it? I made it myself.
No, not particularly. You ever...
I love autistic people. Also, if Warner Brothers ever happens to see this stream and you want to avoid a controversy, hi, I'm an actually autistic actress who has a certification in stage combat. I would love to be in the sequel. Please cast me. I'm represented by KMR. Ah! Oh gosh. Okay, so this is not related to the movie at all, but the photos that she is holding, the paper that they are printed on, is one of my biggest overstimulations. And it's one of the things that I hate the most about being an actor is I have to deal with this paper all the time because my headshots are printed on the same paper. Just touching it is just not a good sensory experience for me. I used to get made fun of in college because we would have to like show up with our headshots and resumes and stuff as practice. And I would always show up and I would hand them to mine, but I'd be wearing gloves, like plastic salad gloves, in order to touch it because I didn't want to touch it. They always looked at me like I was weird and made fun of me. I would rather look weird and be comfortable than be uncomfortable and look normal. I am also an autistic person who cannot have their food touch. If my food touches, it is no longer edible. I cannot eat it. Every time the food touches, it changes either the texture or the taste, and I can't handle that. It's awful. Going to restaurants, neurotypicals just like to pile food on. Like, how do you guys not care about taste and texture? You just pile food on one right on top of the other, and it's just, So the leg thing, the leg roller is not quite a stim. It's a sensory seeking behavior that he's doing in order to maintain his masking capabilities. He is purposefully putting himself in a situation that overstimulates him so that he can basically like get used to it, like shock therapy, but that's just not the way autism works. That is one of the things about this film that I do not like, because it shows that they don't understand how autism works. Because again, like I mentioned before earlier in the stream, statistically on average, what happens with autistic people when we're overstimulated is it gets worse for us over time. Like exposure does not make it easier. It actually oftentimes makes it worse. Now, this is not the case for every autistic person, but this is just for the most part. Like, so it's just not really recommended. So what's happening here is he's having a meltdown due to emotional overstimulation, which is a real thing. And unfortunately, many autistic people, myself included, have destructive tendencies when we melt down. This is a reality. This is an unfortunate reality. There are certain things that I do agree with to help out with this sort of thing, one of them being replacement behaviors. I agree that replacement behaviors can really help somebody be less destructive. The replacement behaviors that I recommend are ones that allow you to be destructive in a healthy way. So like, I like to break and throw things when I melt down. Don't let me around glass things. I will throw them. I want to see them shatter. So what I do instead, so that I'm not constantly buying plates or breaking valuables that I can't replace, what I do instead is I go into the kitchen and I get ice from the freezer. And I take that ice into the bathroom and I throw ice cubes into the shower or into the tub, because it allows me to be destructive in a healthy way. I still get the feeling of throwing something, watching something break, but I'm not actually breaking anything important. I'm fulfilling that emotional need without shaming or judging myself after, because sometimes you just need to destroy. Okay, what we just saw is a restraint scene. That should be the last resort. And if we remember from a certain controversy last year about Sia's film Music, let's talk about the differences between this scene and what happened in Sia's Music. For this scene, the way that he restrained his son was in a way that did not restrict his son's breathing. He is putting no weight on him. He's hugging him really, really tightly, but there's no weight being constrained on him. He's also not even hugging him that tightly. It is very different than the prone restraint that we saw in Sia's Music, where that would get somebody killed. This is, again, this should always be the last resort. This should always be the last resort with an autistic person, and you should always consult the autistic person first before they are in a meltdown and ask them, hey, is that how you handle your meltdowns? If so, then yes, that's an okay thing to do. Consent has to be key beforehand. Again, this should always be the last resort, but if you do have to do that, that is the healthier way of doing it.
Like
he drew the ABA faces on him. He drew the ABA faces on him. I love it. He murdered the ABA faces. I feel like many autistics would like to mimic that sentiment.
You're frustrated.
That's what I am. I'm frustrated. Good.
I
Good.
also
Excellent.
like the relationship dynamic between him and Francis. Like, I know that he's basically teaching him masking training, but I'll give an exception for the teaching of masking training here, because Christian is about to work for some very dangerous people, including several cartels. I feel like they're probably not as autism friendly as we would like them to be. So I'll make an exception here.
Simon Dewey, founder, CEO, Dewey Capital. American.
The things that I would let this man do to me, just, I have a problem. I have a problem. It's okay. but that man is very attractive. Don't mind me simping. It's not my fault he's attractive, okay? It's not my fault. When a man looks like that and he has that level of like confidence and force in his voice, what am I supposed to do? Not simp?
What do you want, Dana Cummings?
So I want to talk about Ben Affleck's performance in particular. Is it ableist that he got the part when it should have gone to an autistic person? Yes, absolutely. But it's, as far as performances of autistic characters by non-autistic actors, this is actually one of the least ableist performances I've seen, especially coming from men. And it feels as though Ben Affleck basically took this part and said, hey, if I was really awkward and unsure of what to do in social situations, how would I act? And I think that's actually perfect. I think that that actually works to the benefit because he doesn't really play into negative stereotypes about autism with his performance. Like, he doesn't, the monotone thing is like very subtle. It's not as over exaggerated as many holistic actors tend to do when they're portraying autism. Like, if you take a look at the way Christian speaks versus the way Sam and Atypical speaks, it's a night and day difference. Now, granted, that's not to say that autistic people don't speak like Sam and Atypical, but the problem with it is that there is just one note of how autistic people speak in film and media, and it always looks and sounds exactly like Sam and Atypical, or like Leonardo DiCaprio in What's Eating Gilbert Grape, or like Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man. Like, they all act the same, but Ben Affleck is very different from all of those performances here. And I do thoroughly enjoy that. I do thoroughly enjoy it. It would have been better. Yes, it absolutely would have been better, and it should have gone to an autistic actor. But for what we have, I am not upset with this performance.
I like dogs playing poker. Because dogs would never bet on things, and so it's incongruous.
So I love the very subtle examples of masking in this scene in particular. Notice he very rarely looks her in the eyes. He is almost always looking straight ahead, but he's still actively listening. He's masking. He's not looking her in the eyes because it makes him uncomfortable. And it's not something that I think holistic people would notice on the first watch. It's so subtle. Like, it's so subtle, but it's a great example of what autistic masking looks like. Because she is actively looking at him the entire time she's addressing him, but he just sits there and he looks straight ahead. This is why I say that just because a performance is ableist doesn't necessarily make it bad, because this is a good performance, but the casting in and of itself is still ableist. I think this scene is really well done.
Why does fun go to die at the University of Chicago?
Oh, no, it's just an expression.
I'm joking.
All right, autistic people, raise your hand if you've ever been in a situation where you took something literally and then just pretended that it was a joke because you didn't want to admit that you took it literally. I better see more hands raised. I'm not. Raise your hand. Raise your hand. You know you've done it. That's what I thought. So I usually have an issue with the autistic people are all good at math stereotype. This is the one film where I actually do kind of give it a pass because, one, they don't use it in a way that like the non-autistic characters exploit the autistic person's math skills for their own gain. Two, the autistic person is actually legitimately the main character and they give him a lot more depth besides just being good at math. And three, the film would not make sense without this. Like, there was no other choice that they could make for this film to make sense without this aspect. And I actually thoroughly love that this film does not make sense unless the main character is autistic. I love that. It just feels like it was a good, purposeful choice to tell an autistic story through a lens that we have never seen before. And I think that that is very unique. In other films, this would have been done really badly, but this film actually does this really, really well.
No sense.
Where's the money coming from?
Exactly.
Okay, so I love this scene so much because this is a rare thing that we get to see in movies, but this is an example of autistic joy. He is so happy because he's thriving in his special interest. He's so excited to talk with her about this. She's listening to him. She's actively participating in the conversation with him. And I really love that. I love that. That's just a subtle thing that it's a small thing that we just really don't get to see in movies about autism. And I love that. And Ben Affleck is actually doing a really good job portraying autistic joy too. Cause like, that's how I get when I talk about sharks. Like that, did you see how he's like ready to like almost jump for joy? Like it's very subtle, but like, it's so well done. I love it. I love this scene. Sound warning. So this scene is a good example of how when one thing like already fucks with our schedule, even if it's something tiny as having more time, it can set our entire rhythm and routine off for the rest of the day. And there's like nothing that we can do except deal with the feelings and try and cope. So this is what a meltdown can look like when an autistic person has become an adult. It can look like self-harm, self-injurious behaviors, still having those same destructive tendencies as when we were children. I have experienced meltdowns exactly like this. I understand why they put this in the film. And I do understand that this is somewhat necessary for the plot for autistic people, because this film is not, while it is about autism, it is not made for autistic people, or else they would not have had the strobe lights, the loud music, things that make it basically inaccessible for many autistic people. Like, I understand why they had this scene in there. It's for the purposes of the autistic audience to understand what autism is like. I cannot say that this doesn't happen. I wish that they had considered how the autistic audience might react to this scene and how it can either be triggering for emotional reasons or triggering for the fact that a large amount of us have comorbidities of epilepsy. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that scene. Self-injurious behaviors are unfortunately common with autistic people. And it's not something that is just something that is more common with higher support needs autistic people. It's not something more common with lower support needs autistic people. It's just common with autistic people across the board. A lot of the times when we can't express how frustrated we are, we result to self-injurious behavior. There are coping mechanisms for that. DBT has a lot of coping mechanisms for self-injurious behavior. I find that the ice cubes method that I explained earlier, where you throw ice cubes in the bathroom, is a very good method for me to try and avoid self-injurious behavior. But I also understand and accept that it's never a behavior that I'm ever going to fully get rid of. And that's just a reality. So the goal is not to get rid of the behavior entirely, but to minimize it and make it as safe as possible. And you do that by finding as many coping skills as you can before it gets to that point. a bit of a headcanon that Christian totally sent them money to cover the cost of the truck afterwards, because I don't think he would just like leave them shit without a truck. You know, he knows how much that costs, and I don't think he's the kind of guy to just like not care. Also, I just have to say, once again, that is something I would love to do as an actor, and I have a lot of experience of doing as an actor. So Warner Brothers, if you ever see this, I am certified in unarmed stage combat with the Fight Master Society, and I have experience doing that. So if you want an autistic actress who can kick ass on a set, I'm your gal. You can tokenize me. It's okay. It's okay. I'll be your token autistic. Yeah, we good? I'll sell out.
Minutes, usually.
Sarcasm? Is that sarcasm?
No, that's not sarcasm. I don't use sarcasm. It's irritation. Everything in the world.
Okay, hold up. I don't know a single autistic person who does not use sarcasms. Most autistic people that I am familiar with are very fluent in the sarcasms. But, you know, my experience is not universal. But I feel like this kind of autistic person would be fluent in the sarcasms. So I feel like that's a failure on the writing. Just that one right there.
Developmental disorders.
Fragile X syndrome, autism.
See, here's the thing. A lesser movie would have just left this at autistic coding and not actually stated the word autism. The fact that this film even just says the word autism, not once but twice, canonically states that this man is autistic, is just a win in and of itself. They set out intentionally with this film to make a movie about an autistic badass. In 2016, when this came out, that was revolutionary. That has never been done before this film. Like on this scale. That has never been done. They've always left it at coding. But they said, no, we are going to make a film about an autistic badass. That's amazing to me. Just a reminder, I say it every time I see it, Asperger's syndrome is not a disorder. It has not been a disorder since 2013. It was eliminated from the DSM-5 because there is literally no difference between Asperger's syndrome and autism. So if your clinician diagnosed you with Asperger's syndrome after 2013, call them out because they are not using up-to-date information and they are legally required to use the DSM-5 if you are in the United States. So, and it was also removed from the ICD just this past year too. So it's not a syndrome anymore. It's not a disorder because there's literally no difference between Asperger's syndrome and autism.
He lived in 34 homes in 17 years.
No wonder this kid was having meltdowns all the time. Moving is extremely stressful for autistic people. Like, I mean, it's stressful for normal people, but it's especially stressful for autistic people.
Unique. I have a high-functioning form of autism, which...
Okay.
I mean...
Yes, he used a functioning label, and that is harmful. Functioning labels are harmful. They do not help autistic people. They hurt autistic people. They stigmatize us, and they don't really define much except that you view some people as less of a full human being. Whether you intend to mean that or not, that's what a functioning label implies. That's why it's offensive. That's why it's hurtful. What you should say is that you have less support needs or you have higher support needs, because those actually describe what you need. Or you should say, I have these autism symptoms and this is where I need support. You know, like there are other ways to say it. But again, the fact that they say the words autism, they make it canonical that he has autism. That is a huge win. For 2016, that's revolutionary. Like, I still can't get over the fact that they did that. In a good way. In a good way. I'm very happy that they did that. I wish that more people would make films that have slightly lesser ableism like this one does.
Crazy.
I have a love-hate relationship with the fact that they didn't kiss. On the one hand, I'm glad that they didn't kiss because the age difference between the actors is just very uncomfortable for me. On the other hand, I do wish we could see autism like more normalized in a romantic setting. I wish that they had given the same, because like in any other action movie, they would have kissed. The only reason that they didn't kiss was because this is also a movie about autism. And that's a bit of a problem for me. It's a minor problem. Like it's nitpicky. It's nitpicky. I'll admit it. But a part of me wishes that we could have gotten the same kind of romance that most action movies get.
You're different. Sooner or later, different scares people.
So, this is why I say it is very important to be careful with the language that you use around your autistic kids. Because we hear it. We internalize it. And I wonder if maybe Christian wouldn't isolate himself from people quite as much if his father didn't emphasize that sooner or later different scares people as an absolute. Because different doesn't always scare people. There are amazing people out there who love and accept us just the way we are, autistic or not. Like, there are many allistic people, non-autistic people who will love and accept us just the way we are. Different does not always scare people. And I just wonder if he hadn't been told that, maybe he would have tried to find love with her.
I could see it in his eyes. The freak wasn't going to let it go.
I like the very subtle pause here, because I imagine everyone here has seen the movie. I like that very subtle pause here. On the first watch, you'll be like, that's just a weird cut, But on the second watch, you notice that, he is slightly triggered by the word freak. Not, triggered in the PTSD sense, but, that does trigger, a small reaction in him because he remembers what it was like for his brother to be called a freak all the time. I don't think that's the immediate putting together of, it must be my brother, or even the building blocks of that. But, he has a slight reaction to the word freak because that's what his brother was called all his life. It's a really subtle moment. It's such a good moment, though. It's John Berthel is a fantastic actor. This film is just so fucking well made. I love it. This is one of my favorite lines.
You ever see a match grade round traveling 3,000 feet per second go through a window? Nobody does.
John Berthel has no right being that attractive talking about guns. He has no. I have a problem. Y'all are the few people that are in here are looking into my soul now and seeing who I simp for. I simp when it comes to actors. There are two actors that I do not stop simping for: Adam Driver and John Bernthal. Yeah, I know. I have a problem. Okay, look, I admit that it's a problem. It's not a problem I'm willing to work on, though.
Just wanted you to be safe. Some of my clients are quite dangerous.
Kind of considered fairly dangerous myself.
Well, you've made improvements.
This is such a, like, this really is a very sibling dynamic. Like, that really is how so many of my fights with my sisters have ended. Like, I've had fights that felt like that. I mean, not all of them ended in physical altercations, but some of them did. And it usually ends with that sort of, like, quiet moment of, like, fuck, dude. Just fuck. What were we fighting? Like, I understand what we were fighting for, but I'm just fucking hurt. And then usually one of us says something stupid that makes the other person laugh. Like, this is very good writing.
But I restore lives, not Dana. Me. Men, women, children. I give them hope. Make them whole. Do you even know what that's like?
Yes, I do.
John Bernthal's face is just what makes that moment so fucking hilarious, because he's just like, I love autistic humor. That is very much that would be how I think an autistic person would be in this, like, scenario, you know? Like, that is because, like, it literally, like, what else is there to say? Autistic people, we don't ramble. We don't really do the rambling. So, like, yeah, okay, boom, done. We are a very anticlimactic people.
1 in 68 children in this country are diagnosed with a form of autism.
I actually think that statistic is higher now. As more information on autism develops, and we fight back against racism and sexism within the psychiatric field, it allows for more people to be diagnosed. So you have to adjust the statistics.
Expectations for your son may change over time. They might include marriage, children, self-sufficiency, and they might not. But I guarantee you, if we let the world set expectations for our children, they'll start low.
This is true.
And they'll stay there.
I agree with just about everything that he's saying so far. Parents of autistic children, they should have expectations of their children. Now, those expectations might look different than the expectations of an autistic child, and that's only natural. I mean, you cannot raise an autistic child the same way you raise a neurotypical one. That's just not the way it works. And so your expectations, even if they're different from your non-autistic children, that's okay. That's normal. That's to be expected. The only thing that I have issues with parents and their expectations of their children is when they say things like, I never would have expected my child to be able to achieve things. Like, that's kind of a messed up thing to say, because the thing is, the achievements will look different. Some parents' expectations of achievements will be a child that can use the bathroom on their own. And that win should be as celebrated as a child who can maintain a job, or a child who can live outside the home. Every single achievement should be celebrated and cherished. I love that she kept the puzzle from that day.
Can he visit with you for a while, Justine? Okay, good. Come on, folks, I'll give you the nickel tour.
You okay with that?
See, okay, that's also a really important thing. For many people, we would not know how to interpret what she said, but the fact that this man has learned how to interpret her advocating for herself, her saying, you know, what she's comfortable with, what she's not comfortable with. Like, he's learned her way of communication, which is so powerful when you have a non-speaking, high support needs autistic person. It's so important to learn their forms of communication. And I love that.
Good. Doc, she could backdoor the Pentagon with that rig.
Hello, Dreamboat. Shall we chat?
That gets me every time, because the fact that they thought to not only include a badass low support needs autistic person, but they also included a badass high support needs autistic person who is non-speaking. That is unheard of in films. That is unheard of. I've never seen a film that worked so hard to make autistic people seem cool. All kinds of autistic people, not just the ones who can speak either. Like, that's amazing to me.
I was just trying to leave something behind.
I legitimately love this movie. I legitimately love this movie. This film has its issues, don't get me wrong. Like, it does have its issues, it does have its ableist moments, but like, this was the first movie I watched where I did feel empowered as an autistic person, where I didn't feel like I was a burden. It was the first film I had ever seen about autism that wasn't a drama, that wasn't even really about romance either. It was just, it's really well made. I think they probably did do some research from Autism Speaks, but they did enough research to know not to thank Autism Speaks or put Autism Speaks in the credits. So they at least did that bare minimum. And I think this is one of the first times I ever felt like an autistic writer actually legitimately cared about giving autistic people good representation. Like, this was not written with the intent to Oscar bait. This film was written with the intent of making autism look cool, which that doesn't happen in Hollywood. The fact that this one writer did it just means the world to me, which is why, like, I know that this movie does have its problems. It does have its ableism. Like, there is an issue with the fact that it does feature scenes that are inaccessible to members of the autism community while still claiming to be a film about the autism community, or, well, about an autistic person, not the autism community. That is an issue. You know, there is ableism in the casting. That is an issue. But this was one of the few times where they still at least made a good movie. And the representation is not awful. The representation is good for an holistic perspective. Like, it's not an holistic perspective, but the representation in this film is good for what it is, which is autism played by holistic people. But in a world where, like, the representation that we usually get is stuff like Rain Man or Music or The Good Doctor, I would much rather have this than any of those. I love this movie so much. I own it on Blu-ray, I own it on Vudu, and now it's going to be in my favorites on HBO, because I will not be without this movie. I had a poster of this movie hanging in my closet for so long because I was working in a movie theater when it first came out, and I begged my boss to let me take home the big poster for it so that I could always have it. And there was another employee who also wanted it at the time, and I went to my manager and I was like, look, Ruben, I know that it's your choice who gets the poster, but I'm gonna pull the card I never pull on you. This movie's about autism. I'm the autistic person in this theater. I deserve the post. I deserve the cool autism movie poster. Like, can please give it to me? And Ruben gave it to me. I really love this movie. I am not opposed to a sequel. I hope that when they do the sequel, I do hope that they, because I don't like change, so I don't want them to change the cast. But I do hope that they widen the cast to include autistic people. Include me. I'm an autistic people. And I can do the badass stuffs. I can do the badassery. I can't do a fight scene with John Bernthal. No, I would be too intimidated, far too intimidated. That would, oh God. See, there are certain actors that I don't think I have the capability of meeting because I will have an autism meltdown from excitement. John Bernthal and Adam Driver are those two actors. Like, if I ever meet either one of them, no words. I will explode. I will explode. I'll just spontaneous human combustion from excitement. So that was The Accountant. I love this movie. And despite its problems, I'll never stop loving this movie. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'll probably watch this movie again at some point, probably in like 2 weeks. I hope you guys have a good night. I love and appreciate all of you. Bye.